Welcome, everybody, to the House of Hustle podcast here through Sports Radio 810. We are presented by Charlie Hustle. It has been a while since me and my partner, Steven St. John, have done a podcast, but we're back post-Super Bowl championship for the Chiefs, and it's time to gear up for some college basketball talk. We got the All-Star game coming up this weekend in the NBA. The trade deadline has passed in the NBA. So much to cover in terms of the NBA here at the All-Star break. So it's time to gear up for basketball, college, and pro. Got a lot to cover. Steven, I'm excited for our pod. It's been a little while.
Oh, absolutely. I'm excited for it. We got through a Super Bowl championship with the Kansas City Chiefs. We do want to mention our wonderful sponsor, Charlie Hustle. Go to charliehustle.com. And if you order something at the Charlie Hustle, use the code House of Hustle, all one word, and you can get 15% off their Collegiate Collection. No minimum purchase requirement. So anything that you want to get from Charlie Hustle out of their Collegiate Collection, you can get 15% off by using the code House of Hustle. And with the Big 12 championship coming up in Kansas City and the SEC championship coming up down in Nashville, if you want to represent your favorite school, the best way to do it is get something from the Collegiate Collection at Charlie Hustle and use that code House of Hustle when you order at charliehustle.com. But before we get into college, let's talk about a couple of big things that happened in the NBA before the trade deadline. Of course, the headliner, Kevin Durant, goes to the Suns, and it now looks like they've got all the pieces to make a title run. But as we saw in Brooklyn, just because it looks good on paper, it doesn't always work out on the floor. So what do you think? We've seen him now. It's at least it's been a little bit after the trade deadline for the dust to settle. What do you think of KD to the Suns, and now are they the favorite to go to the finals out of the West?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people would say the Suns are the favorite when you put Kevin Durant and pair him with Chris Paul and Melvin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. The Phoenix Suns had to give up a lot, as we knew they would. I think there was only one team that was going to have a chance, I would say, at Kevin Durant. And look, things move pretty quickly when one player gets traded, or we see it all the time in free agency and professional sports. When one player signs and sets the market, then everything kind of falls after that, right? The chips fall after that. When Kyrie Irving wanted out and the Nets had to make that move, when I think it was time for the Nets to make that move, everything that was taking place with Kyrie really all season, and Kyrie gets dealt to Dallas, and I think that's when things started with Kevin Durant. I think the Nets originally had the thought of keeping Kevin Durant, but with free agency looming for KD in the summer, I think the Nets had a tough decision to make at that point in terms of what's the future look like, what's the future direction in terms of the draft pick compensation they could get back for Kevin Durant if Kevin didn't want to be there and was already looking to move on after this season. And good on Sean Marks and Kevin Durant to have a conversation about that. And I think it helps both parties moving forward. Kevin goes to Phoenix, where he wanted to be. That was the team that he targeted. That was the team that I think he's had interest with over the last year or so, even dating back to last summer when there was some conversation about him being dealt at the NBA draft. But this is a move that was made ultimately with, I think, the best interest of all parties, especially after Kyrie was dealt to Dallas. And we'll see what happens with Kyrie and Luka. I think that's really interesting and what Dallas did and the moves that they made. But I still think you look at Denver. Denver's a very good team. And
should they have done more than acquire Thomas Bryant?
I think there's a conversation to be had because I think so many times when other teams make these deals, you think, well, what's Denver gonna do? What's these other teams that are in the running for the play? What are the Clippers gonna do? What are the Kings gonna do? The Kings have been so good. What are the Pelicans gonna do? We hear all this stuff, but sometimes it's okay to sit tight if you're in a good place and you don't want to give up too much. I think that's always going to be weighing your options of when you have draft capital, when you have cap space to make these moves, and you want to take on players that might be a little too much that hinder your plans of your future. That's when you might want to sit tight. And I think that's what Denver did. They got Jamal Murray healthy. He's back. Michael Porter's healthy and back. Obviously, the Joker's probably going to be the MVP right now with the way he's been playing, shooting over 60% from the field. It's just ridiculous what the Joker's doing, and he's leading this team in every way. So I think it's okay. I think Coach Malone would tell you that too, that they're okay sitting tight. They didn't want to give up too much. They do get a big back that gives them some depth. at the 5. So I think it's ultimately a decision that every team had to make, not just Denver. And they stay put. They're still atop the West, and I think they're comfortable where their team's at moving forward. But make no mistake about it, the Western Conference looks a lot of fun. I think the Lakers, the moves they made for Jared Vanderbilt, Malik Beasley, D'Angelo Russell, D'Lo back in L.A., like that's a really intriguing team because I think they got better. I think they added pieces that could come off the bench. D'Lo is a proven scorer. He's a mature, tough guard. We saw that the other night. They beat us in L.A. the other night. And he was great, and it was his first game with the Lakers. I think it's a good fit in terms of AD, LeBron, adding D'Lo, who's a very good passer and a very good scorer, natural point guard. I think they upgraded their roster and they got better.
Who had the best trade deadline in the East?
The East is tough, because I think it depends on how you look at it. Brooklyn got a ton back in terms of where they are. Cam Thomas is scoring at a high level. He's a guy that was drafted a year ago that is going to take on that role. But I think that, when you look at the Eastern Conference, the Celtics and the Bucks right now at the top. The Bucks adding Jay Crowder, I think is a good move for them. They add a veteran piece that's a championship caliber player, good shooter. You look at other teams. I think the Knicks adding Josh Hart is actually a really good get for them. We had Josh in New Orleans. They needed a guard off the bench that could come in and help them defensively, rebounding, being an off-ball guard. They needed that. I think that was a good get for them. These other teams that were making moves, the Miami Heat are sitting there at 7. The Cleveland Cavaliers at 4. Those two teams, to me, those teams could make some noise in the East. I think they're we just got done playing Cleveland, a couple nights ago. They're a loaded team. Did they do enough? Some small moves here and there. Yeah, you'll see kind of what plays out as we move forward into the rest of the year. But I think the East is a different conversation because so much was made of Toronto and what they might be doing in terms of dealing some of their guards, and they're still a young roster. What was Toronto going to do? I think that was a big. Where was Fred VanVleet going to go? We weren't sure. Where was Pascal Siakam going to go? We weren't sure. So much was made of OG. The reality is this is when it gets closer to the deadline, sometimes teams stay put and don't make moves, and I think it's okay when you sit tight and you're a team that you still have a belief in, you still think you can turn it around. Every single team in the league is right now regrouping at the All-Star break to make this stretch run as we move forward into this March run going into the playoffs in April.
All right, let's put your NBA scouting hat on. I know a few days ago you were at the UMKC Kansas City Roos North Dakota State game. And first, I just want to ask you, what did you think? I know they lost, but this is the first year of transition for Marvin Menzies, who's been a very successful head coach in previous stops. He's gone with an international flavor with the Roos. What do you think about the talent he's put together in his first year that you saw the other night?
Yeah, so he's got a couple players that I think are good for the Summit League that showed well last night, and just kind of looking at their team as a whole year. This is year one. They're having their growing pains. 11-17 team. They lost last night to North Dakota State, but won at North Dakota State earlier in league play. They're right in the middle of the pack of the league. I think that's where you want to be in year one, is especially when you're retooling the roster and it's an entirely new roster. Shamari Allen is probably the guy that I really liked last night. He had 17 and 7, was really good off the dribble. Kind of took over in the second half and got UMKC back in the game. North Dakota State kind of put their foot on the gas, but Raquandis Mitchell is also a guy that scores the ball at a really high level. He's their leading scorer. Pretty talented kid, shoots the ball really well. Those two guards are really tough, and I think that's something that Coach Menzie identified was adding guard play. Their bigs give them good minutes. There's still some rawness there. There's some development I think that's needed, but he's got a young roster for the most part. That hopefully the name of the game is keeping guys, developing guys. But ultimately, year one, they've won 7 league games. It's a good start, and it's a starting point with a whole new roster. And I think he's trying to keep some of these guys. Your point about the international piece, that's what I'm really curious about, is kind of how he continues to improve the roster. Every coach in year one, and especially now in today's NIL world, transfer portal, different ways to put the roster together. It's going to be kind of like free agency for college basketball when you look at it in the portal. So we'll see how it goes. But North Dakota State was impressive. Grant Nelson is a guy that's kind of blown up on radars, 6'10", power forward, plays the 5 for them. He was pretty good last night. I thought UMKC did a pretty good job against him defensively last night, which was a good sign for things moving forward.
You were there to see a kid from North Dakota State, though. Tell us about him.
Yeah, so Grant's the guy that is the guy that's sort of taken a turn, and around this time of the year, you've seen so many guys at the Power 5 schools. You're having conversations with your international team of guys that could be on the international radar. But for me, also around this time of the year, you're trying to get more time at the mid-major level. Even some of the D2 guys, that have made it, that have put their foot forward and been able to, make it on an NBA roster that we're seeing this year. Kid from Northwest Missouri State that was called up to the Houston Rockets that's playing a little bit. You always want to try to identify players that are playing really well and playing at a high level that you think have a chance maybe, to wiggle their way into a G League invite, to the G League Combine. Like, those names are going to be there in terms of guys you might want to see in a different setting. That would be Grant Nelson for me, from North Dakota State. 6'10", pretty good size. I think he can shoot it a little bit more than what he's shown, but very skilled off the dribble. He's a great rebounder, plays hard, plays the right way, very unselfish, and really good ball skills for his size. Kind of plays like a guard. And anytime you see a kid at 6'10" that can handle the ball, that can shoot it, that can make moves off the dribble, that shows some things defensively, shows more athleticism than I thought I'd see. That was good to see. But a guy that's really kind of blown up on radars. Very good player in the Summit League. So it was good to see him live in person here in Kansas City.
All right, let's move into some of the local action going on, and maybe not quite specifically games, but just kind of overall what's going on in the Big 12. You've got Kansas and Texas and Baylor and Iowa State and even K-State and Oklahoma State all within a couple of games of each other, all jockeying for position before the Big 12 tournament comes to Kansas City. All right, if you had, I bet I can guess who you're gonna pick. But if you had to put money on one of these horses to finish first, and maybe it's not gonna be anybody. Maybe we're gonna see 2 or 3 teams tie for first place.
Yeah.
But now that things are starting to shake out, K-State's kind of falling back a little bit. Kansas has caught up to everyone. But I mean, Kansas, Texas, Baylor, Iowa State, they're all right there together. Who's gonna end up the last man standing in the number 1 seed going into the Big 12 tournament? What's your prediction?
Well, I think it's going to come down to these next 4 days.
And then that last game of the year is Kansas at Texas. By the way.
That's another big one. But this stretch Baylor has, they go to Kansas and then they go to K-State. I will be at that Kansas State-Baylor game. I can't wait to be at that one. I think that's going to be a great one because then Kansas State's looking at it as like, hey, we have all the ability to get back in it, but they got to pull off some wins. This is what makes this league so fun, is it just depends on kind of what team continues to hit stride. I think you would give the edge to Kansas just because they're playing so well right now. They're finding ways to win. They won at Oklahoma State, tough place to play. Oklahoma State's had some really good wins in this league. You look at the bottom of the league, too, by the way, with Texas Tech turning it on. Oklahoma just beat Kansas State, and Oklahoma's at the bottom of the league, and they're a team that smacked Alabama in the Big 12 SEC Challenge.
In West Virginia, as of the recording of this podcast, they're 4-9 in the conference and 15-11 overall, and many people have them in the tournament.
Right.
I saw one projection as with West Virginia as a 10 seed taking on the 7 seed Missouri Tigers. But I mean, is West Virginia is the Big 12 a 10 bid league?
I don't know if it's a 10-bid league. I've heard that. I have a hard time thinking.
Not 10, but 8. There's only 10 teams in the Big 12. Well, there's 10 teams in the Big 12. How many teams are the Big 10? I don't know how many teams are anywhere. But is it an 8 bid league?
I mean, to your point though, I mean, like there has been some chatter of like, well, the Big 12's that good. I mean, Oklahoma's had some major quality wins. I mean, there's not going to be 10 teams. But it can't. I think there's too many good teams in other leagues. But I think 8 is a stretch. It absolutely could happen. I think it's more like 7, but you could see 8. Yeah, you could absolutely. So much is made right now. We're mid-February. There's 3 weeks left in this regular season. This last part of the conference season. Some huge matchups. These teams are still playing for conference tournament championships and conference tournament seeding because we've seen it before. There's teams that can crack their way into the bubble conversation or that last 4 in off of games that come down to the conference tournament. And so some of these games and some of these teams, especially at the bottom of these leagues, I think the SEC is another conversation, and the Big Ten is a little bit more down than what we've seen. Obviously, the Pac-12 is very much down. ACC's down. So it's going to come down to me, Big 12 and SEC. Those two leagues have a conversation of what teams are going to crack the code of these last 4 teams that make it.
I don't think there's any argument that Bill Self is the best coach in the Big 12. So if you look at who the best coach is, Kansas gets at. Who is the most talented team?
I think for me, it's Texas has a lot of talent. I think Texas has the size, experience. They have depth. I like Texas. I think they're a team that, and all things considered, the job that coaching staff has done, all top to bottom, to be where they're at is really impressive with everything that's going on with Chris Beard. But that's another conversation. To me, that like the Mitchell, the freshman that is a 6'9", 6'10" athlete. Marcus Carr can score the ball at a really high level. You look at Tyrese Hunter, who has been a little bit up and down. That's a kid that he can turn on. Iowa State knows that all too well. He's a guy that can take over a game and make shots. That they got all these pieces that I think can be very, very intriguing in terms of most talented. You look at Kansas though. DeJuan Harris is still, to me, the best point guard in this league. And there's so many great point guards in this league. But you look at the job that he's done in terms of pass-first point guard, Grady Dick, Jalen Wilson. Those two guys have been consistent all year. The thing that I think it's going to come down to as well when you talk about these teams and who could pull this out, the reason why I like Texas is the depth. I do think they have a bench that can come in, and they've been very productive with their 8-9 guys that they play. Baylor's in this conversation. I think Keontae George, in terms of talent, I think he's the most talented player. He's cold-blooded. I mean, he is a shot maker at his size. He can go do a lot of things off the dribble. I think he's a guy that, from a talent standpoint, and he's had up and down games, but he's had games where he's had 7 assists. So he can do, he can pass the ball. Adam Flagler is probably a guy that is overlooked as a point guard. But for Kansas, DeJuan Harris, for me, is the guy you circle that leads their team. We've said it so many times before. He's still the straw that stirs the drink. And I think when it comes down to these type of moments where they have to go win big games on the road and they have to win close games and tough games to get over the kind of be over the top and win the league, DeJuan Harris seems to always be able to do the things on offense and in defense that impact winning. Bill Self would tell you that. Anybody that's associated with that program, Jalen Wilson would tell you that. And Jalen Wilson has played at such a high level, is going to be an All-American.
So who would get your vote for Player of the Year right now in the Big 12?
I think right now, for me, it would be Jalen Wilson. I think all things considered, Keontae Johnson definitely has a conversation to be had in terms of Player of the Year. I think Texas would say, what about Marcus Carr? I mean, Marcus Carr has been so good for them too. For Baylor, I think you look at Adam Flagler is going to be in the conversation too. He's had such a great year, but I think when you look at all the numbers and the production and the team that wins the league, I think Jalen Wilson is probably going to be the pick right now. But let's be honest, there's 4 or 5 guys that could be in that conversation still right now. I don't think it's a sold, this is the guy. Like some years it has been, but I think right now I would give the edge to Jalen.
Same question, SEC.
SEC's tough in terms of Player of the Year. In terms of SEC, I would say you look at the teams: Alabama, A&M, Tennessee at the top. I think there's a conversation to be had about maybe a player in the 4 or 5 range. Like you look at Oscar Tshiebwe being Player of the Year last year. Kentucky's still making a run in the top 5. I love Brandon Miller, and I know he's a freshman, but he's been the guy that I think has dominated the league more times than not. I think he's a guy that probably is in this conversation. You could look up and down the board though in terms of the league. Alabama Tennessee was a great game the other night. Tennessee's been really good. Zakai Ziegler has been kind of probably one of the better point guards. It's underrated. But right now I would have Brandon Miller at the top of the list. He's a top 5 arguably pick. He's been consistent the entire season for the most part. He's had a couple games where he struggled, but for a freshman to win it would be really surprising, but I think he's deserving of it because he's been that good all year, and it's why Alabama's at the top of the league.
I've heard several people, including Dennis Gates, say that Alabama, at their best, they're the best team in the nation. Do you believe that?
I would agree. I think Houston has a say in this. I think Houston, when they're at their best, is really good, and I think Kelvin Sampson is such a great coach that, I think they're in this conversation. But top to bottom, Alabama is so impressive. I've seen them twice on the road. I saw both wins on the road. Arkansas, Tennessee. They're a team that has star power. They have freshmen that continue to just impress and impress. Noah Clowney is a guy that, 6'10", he's a 5, but he can play the 4 and he can shoot, and he's a perfect off-ball guard. What they've added to, Jaden Bradley came back from injuries. He's another freshman that is getting better and better, and I knew he would be. He was a very, very talented senior in high school that was heavily recruited, chose Alabama. He's a guy that would be an under-the-radar kind of X factor for them that they've added to their team that can start. He can come off the bench. He's a great pass-first point guard, great in pick and roll, really good defender. But getting Mark Sears in the transfer portal, he's a 4-year guy, a guy that has scored the ball at such a high level before he got to Alabama. He's been great, and he's a guy that is a score-first guard. But the way that Nate Oates has done such a great job of getting this team to really just embrace, there's so many guys that can score. Brandon Miller is a great scorer. Mark Sears is a great scorer. Jaden Bradley can score. Noah Clowney can score. They just have all these pieces. And, oh, by the way, they bring Javon Quinterly off the bench, who was a starting point guard for them last year. And he's a backup point guard, and he comes in the game. And, it's just, again, I go back to the word depth. Depth is so important in February and March, winning games, being at the top of the league. You got to have pieces. Like Brandon Miller probably is going to be SEC Player of the Year, but they're good not just because of Brandon Miller. They're good because they got a top-to-bottom roster that is really impressive. They play a team style of ball. They're very good defensively. They can shoot it. They can play physical. They can play with pace. They can play in the half court. There's so many ways that they can beat you, and I think that's what makes them so impressive.
Speaking of Alabama and Nate Oates, it's impressive that he's doing this at Alabama because let's be honest, that's not a college basketball hotbed,
right?
And then so people look at him and they go, okay, he's the next guy that a basketball school is going to go and poach, right? But Alabama, if it's about money, if they want to keep him, they got the money, right? They got the boosters. Do they care enough? And then you look like, okay, where has he been before? Where did he play? Who could lure him away that would mean more than money, right? Because some guys will go to the alma mater where they coached before, and that's more than money. And you look, he's from Watertown, Wisconsin. He played at Maranatha Baptist and then was an assistant there and was an assistant at Wisconsin Whitewater and then was the head coach for a decade at Romulus High School and then an assistant at Buffalo, then head coach at Buffalo. That's not your traditional path to be, the one of the leading candidates of National Coach of the Year. And there's no natural. Well, you would always hear about, hey, Mike Anderson at some point is going to go back to Arkansas. Well,
right.
Sorry, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Though.
Oh, yeah.
But there's he's going to go back. There's nowhere for him to go back to.
Mm-hmm.
And so, do you think Alabama can keep him and he can stay there and continue to build at Alabama, or do you think a college basketball blue blood is going to come and poach him at some time because he doesn't have the normal track record you see of a coach of what he's doing right now?
Right. So this is a great question for me because, we've drafted in New Orleans, we drafted Herb Jones, we drafted Kyra Lewis. Those are players that played for Coach Oates. You look at the guys that he has put in the league, and I just laugh because we have a few of those guys. John Petty's on our G League team, so we actually have 3 guys. But you look at his teams that have been so successful, he has gotten the most out of every team he's had at Alabama. And I say that, and I know it's like, well, it's an obvious. Alabama's been so good. But it's so many times you hear about football teams and football programs. Well, that's a football school. Well, there's no bigger football school than the University of Alabama, right? You look at the job he's done when Avery Johnson did a great job at Alabama, right? And you're thinking, man, Avery kind of had it humming a little bit, and Nate Oates comes right in and just takes that program to another level. I love his energy on the bench. His coaching staff's terrific. They recruit so well. They, like I've said before, they recruit guys that fit how they want to play. They identify size, versatility, length, and skill. They incorporate it all. They're not just going to take a guy that is as a project. They want to bring a guy in that can compete and help them right away. And they've been able to keep guys too. Like they haven't lost many guys in the transfer portal either. So that's a part of it. In terms of poaching him, if I'm Coach Oates, I mean, they're building a new arena for him. That was a big part of it because, obviously facilities are everything. The job he's done, it warrants all these things that he's wanting and asking for.
He was making $4,500 on top of his teaching salary 10 years ago, coaching high school basketball in Detroit. Now, after he signed an extension in February, he gets a minimum of $4.5 million per year over the next 6 years. And the other
Add
thing
some
is,
zeros to
right,
that.
So he's proven you can win there.
And
he can win maybe in an environment where all the angry people are focused on football. I can just do my thing here.
Right.
Like, say, when you go to Texas
right.
and you don't win and don't go to the Final Four, people get pissed off at you if you're in Texas. If you go to one of the Blue Bloods, and if you go to Kentucky and you don't make it to the Final Four, then you suck.
Yep.
Or to Alabama, he can just kind of do his thing, right, and not have that scrutiny that comes along with being a coach at a Blue Blood.
And he's the biggest show in town because obviously, no pro sports teams in Alabama. So he is in terms of basketball, they're it. That's why you take that job. That's what's intriguing about it.
Maybe you stay.
So maybe you stay. And obviously there's so many different reasons why a coach would leave a school. Sometimes it's a relationship they have with the AD, and that's all it comes down to. They like everything else. You never know. It's all speculation many times of what different things could cause it. Sometimes it's, well, my wife, is from this town. There's always reasons why a coach leaves. But I think in his case, in terms of just the basketball part of it and the resources that are being pumped into the basketball program, NIL is such a big conversation, and the way Alabama has that NIL fund set up.
They've got a blueprint to follow from football, right?
Exactly. I mean, it's not solely dictated and predicated just that NIL goes to football. I mean, it's a fun, it's a collective that I think helps them in recruiting. So I think it's a situation. He's built it up. They want him there, clearly. There's the investment made to him. Now, look, there's going to be plenty of schools that are going to be calling him. Texas will be calling him. There's every coach that's going to be, every program is going to be calling him. I think he's happy where he's at. I think they've had success. The SEC, I said this about Mizzou, right? I think Mizzou, although so much is made of football, and we want Mizzou football to be good, and we want to compete in the SEC, and football drives everything, basketball still, from a historical standpoint, dating back to Norm, it's a basketball school as well, and we have been successful in both. I think Nate Oates looks at it the same way. Well, football's had all this success. They've won all these national championships. Nick Saban is a god, there. He's secure enough in his own skin where, hey, I know Nick Saban is the guy. I know, but why can't we be in this conversation? And you know what drives that? Success. And they have won a lot of games since he's been the head coach, and they've recruited talent. They got the player of the year, in my opinion, Brandon Miller, on their roster. He's a freshman. That to me, if you're an Alabama fan, and I get football drives everything, well, right now basketball's going on. That's going to drive everything. That's going to drive the attention. That's going to drive the excitement. That's going to drive the donations. And the athletic director is going to be really happy with how things are going, especially when you're opening a new arena soon and you want to fill that place. They're getting that fan support and the buy-in more than they ever have.
Let me say, he's staying at least for a while, because his buyout in this new contract would be, for the first year, $12 million, second year, $10 million, third year, $7 million, then $1 million. And so it'll be a couple of years where anyone wants to fork over that kind of money. But maybe if you're him, Texas calls like, I'm good. Hey, before we run out of time for this for this episode of House of Hustle, what about our Charlie Hustle Hustler of the Month? And no, it's not a magazine. We're talking about a player that Jarrett Sutton, if he sees something that catches his eye, whether it's the high school level, college level, NBA level, for the House of Hustle Hustler of the Month, someone that exemplifies what Jarrett Sutton looks for in a basketball player, most importantly, some hustle. All right, who you got?
So I think it's tough because there's two guys that are in the back of my mind for this, but I am going to give it to who I think is going to be the National Player of the Year. And the reason why you're like, well, you're picking the National Player of the Year, but there's going to be a reason for this. So I'm going to pick Zach Edey of Purdue as my House of Hustle player. Here's why. Zach Edey at Purdue has seen Travion Williams, Jaden Ivey, a lot of these players that have gone before him that were the guy at Purdue. And since I've been, evaluated, Zach since he was in high school, he's been the same guy. He's kind of a lunch pail, blue collar, hard-nosed kid. He's 7'4", and most guys at 7'4" get overlooked actually because they don't move fast enough. They can't fit in the modern game. They're old school. They're 90s type of player.
For about 20 minutes a game,
exactly.
Maybe.
Zach Edey has been so dominant this year. It's unbelievable what he's done. Rebounding, blocking shots, his efficiency. And I've seen him play 3 times this year. It is unbelievable how much contact he takes. We talking from an NBA standpoint, like Zion Williamson takes so much contact of the style of play he plays with, but he's a totally different type of player than Zach. Zach is a traditional back to the basket big, but he's gotten so much better over the course of a few years. Matt Painter deserves so much credit for this, by the way. Coach Painter is a terrific coach. I hate to bring up Coach Painter. We've done this before. We've done this before, Stephen, but he is such a terrific basketball coach, and he's got a little bit of an old school flavor to him, but he's also got the modern day sense. But how Purdue plays, and I know they just got a tough loss the other night, but they've been one of the best teams in the country, and Zach Edey's probably going to be National Player of the Year, and he deserves it. He's been consistent night in, night out. It's not just the scoring. It's not just because he's big. His effort level, his motor, his toughness, his competitiveness, his selflessness, and Stephen, the deciding factor for me in giving him the Courage Award for this month, our House of Hustler, if you will, he took the microphone. I know you saw this after they lost at Indiana. Purdue, Indiana, it's like Texas football, right? You go to Texas football. You listen to Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes talk about football in Texas. There's that pride, right, of high school football in Texas. It's the same thing in basketball in Indiana. When I go there to recruit and scout and talk to coaches, and I love going to Indiana because you go to those like old hickory gyms. You go to Butler and you go to these. Indianapolis held the Final Four back a few years back when we were in the COVID NCAA tournament. It was so much fun because basketball there is huge. It's massive. It drives everything in the state of Indiana. And the Purdue-Indiana rivalry is so big, and both those teams are so good in the Big Ten. And you look at the Indiana team, Trace Jackson Davis is such a great player, and he was the other guy in the back of my mind because he's been so good this year. But Zach Edey, Purdue gets beat at Indiana, and there's a question to one of Zach Edey's teammates that was more of a directive of something that his teammate did not do well in the final moments of the game that lost him the game. And it's true. There was a turnover that happened. It lost him the game.
Well, the play right before that, saw Mason in the corner. He was wide open, and he was there open again for a split second. I just held on to it too long, and he got there.
Just to clarify, that was one play, obviously in a big moment, but every play is big in a game like this. I had too many turnovers in the first half. I didn't come out with the energy I needed. Obviously, that's a big play, and people might look at that, but you can point out 3 or 4 plays by everyone that could have made up that one possession. So it's not just on him, it's on the entire team.
He took ownership, he took accountability, and he took the microphone from a freshman who was getting asked this question. So he was taking on the role of, no, I'm not going to let my teammate feel this. I'm not going to let a freshman feel this, that they lost this rivalry game, knowing fully, too, that there's fans out there that jump on Twitter and go at these guys that are young players that have been so good for their teams all year, and they make one bad mistake in a rivalry game, and then they get thrown to the wolves. Zach Edey steps up to the microphone and takes the brunt of it, and he was the best player on the floor in the game, and he's saying, no, we lost the game too because of mistakes I made. That, to me, shows that the courage, the toughness, the intangible traits that every coach wants in a player. And it's just the winning mentality. So our House of Hustle, player with hustle this month, it's got to go to Zach Edey and just what he's done all year for Purdue.
Great choice. That's it for this episode of House of Hustle. We'll have another one back at you next week. And remember, go to charliehustle.com. Use the code House of Hustle when you check out, and you can get 15% off the Collegiate Collection, whether it's Mizzou, K-State, KU, any school you follow, go to Charlie Hustle. Use the code House of Hustle. Get 50% off, Jarrett Sutton.
Can't beat it. And look, we're mid-February here, Steven. We got a few weeks left. NCAA tournament's approaching. Selection Sunday's approaching.
March Madness.
This is such a fun time taking, football's done now. It's all hoops. And I can't wait to see how the NCAA tournament goes. And then right after that, NBA playoffs start. We got a lot to cover.
Bum, 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 bum. That's Jarrett Sutton. I'm Steven St. John. This is a House of Hustle. We'll be back at you next week.